Welcome to the Nomad Futurist podcast, where ideas shape the future and visionaries redefine what's possible. Join us as we dive deep into the evolution of technology, society, and human potential, spotlighting the voices driving change and reimagining our world. Connect with us and join us at media.nomadfuturist.org. The future is a story we write together. Let's kick it off. Here are your hosts, Phil and Nabeel.
Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabeel Mahmood, calling in from Scottsdale, Arizona.
This is your co-host, Phillip Koblence, calling from Montclair, New Jersey.
This is Will Charnock from outside of Houston, Texas.
This is Will's better-looking brother, Sean Charnock from Dallas, Texas.
Oh, brilliant. So you guys must be twins.
Something like
that.
Not too much.
Our mom kept...
Not too much. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has sort of been a bit overdue. I would say you are the second set of brothers that we've got on the podcast. And I understand that both of you live close enough, but in different cities, and have been sort of in the sector for a while. So before we get started, Will, do you mind, because you seem to be more technical than Sean and we can get deeper into it. Since you got your microphone working first, do you mind taking a quick stab and telling our audience a bit about yourself? What are you up to these days?
Sure. So my name is Will Charnock. I run a global infrastructure team for a company called Thales. They bought a internet security company called Imperva about a year and a half ago. They needed somebody to replace my predecessor to come in and who had sort of been there and done that. My background is heavy on the internet infrastructure side. I've helped build and run some large CDNs and cloud computing companies. So that's what I'm doing these days.
Brilliant. How about you, Sean?
Unlike Will, I came at this from a business perspective. He is the technical one, although I can sometimes get my audio to work. So grew up in and around the telecom space, and that merged into this emerging data center world, which we're all part and parcel to. Been in and around the technology space since about 2000, with some interesting interweavings into cybersecurity, which we're at a cybersecurity company, software company, cloud companies, obviously Softlayer in the past. And today I am the Chief Strategy Officer for Center Square as well.
Always the best square of the Hollywood squares.
It's the Center Square.
Always the funniest one, which is why they put Sean in the Center Square.
That's right. The Jim J. Bullock of
Jim J. Bullock of the data center world. I fucking love it. Okay, can I start by saying I have wanted to do this for we only started this 5 years ago, and I've wanted to have this podcast for more than those 5 years. The nexus of the entire podcast was, let's get the Charnock brothers on the podcast together, even before the nexus of this idea came to be.
Finally got to our agents.
I just can't believe it. I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe the bald people finally outnumber the people with hair. I said this in the Smith brother one, where I'm the unsuccessful brother. I feel like here I actually look like I could be the unsuccessful brother of the three of us. One thing that I am fascinated by in general is we talk about how people come into the digital infrastructure industry in general through all these weird winding roads. And the chances of having two people from the same family not just enter the digital infrastructure industry, but just excel. If you look at your LinkedIn profiles, CEOs and Softlayer and Packet Fabric and Linode and Faction, and you have all of this incredible experience that you could not have reached higher levels in our industry from the birth of our industry. And I'm just fascinated by how that happens. To how are there two of you in the same family? So if we can go back in time, I'll let either of you start, and whoever starts will tell me more about it than whatever the answer to the question is. Start, go ahead. But what is the background? How do you guys grew up together? Where did you grow up? And how do you wind up in our crazy industry and then eventually reaching higher than the highs?
I'll go first since I'm the oldest. We grew up in Florida, actually, on the Gulf Coast, down in the Naples-Fort Myers area. So growing up, I had a knack for computers, math, stuff like that. But ironically, I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to become a doctor. So I went to college in Houston, studied biology. And then, of course, I like to tell people life happened, ended up having a baby, had to figure out what to do with my life. I got an opportunity to join a friend of mine's company. He had started up a dial-up ISP in the Dallas area. So he brought me in, taught me a little bit about Unix administration. I took it from there. Within a year or two, I was running all the technical operations in the company. This was during the dot-com years. So we were able to get that company to a point where we were able to sell it. Sean can talk a little bit about his journey. Probably my fault. He ended up working in this industry, but he was a college student, wanted to get out of the house, I'm assuming. Came and lived with me and my ex-wife for a number of years, and while he was working and going to school. And that's sort of what got him started down this path, truthfully.
There's a couple of years in between there. He probably forgot. Joke, I accidentally got into the technology space, but I was in university in Florida, and I have a finance and banking and real estate degree from undergraduate degree, and had a pretty fruitful job with Merrill Lynch at the time. Bunch of business offers coming out of school to go do some stuff, but I'm not very smart. So I said, why don't I go take a job that I didn't know how to do, paid a lot less than anything else, required me to move, and probably didn't have the sanest people involved, but it was interesting. And Will being out here with it, newborn baby, his wife. I don't shy away. I'm not a straight line guy. So I like the adventure of it all. All that made sense. Came out here, Will's executive team that he was working with at the company then. And it was really the precursor for that roll-up strategy around all the ISPs that happened early 2000s. It was one of those. And they were like, hey, can you do this, this, and this? And of course I said, yes, I couldn't. I was really bad at it. That's the truth. It was like sell. I'm 21 years old, coming out of college, and they're like, hey, can you sell something? I went, I can sell anything, but I wasn't very good at it. But I learned a lot about the inner workings of what would become the space and got a base for that. They were going through, Will can talk about the evolution of it, but that company ended up being one of those rolled up ISPs. I left or got told.
This is the planet.
Not the planet, sorry, not the planet. It was a Fastlane.
Dial-up ISP.
Let the record show that Sean did not even know the name of the company he was talking about.
My factor of caring has stopped after a certain recollection. That was going through that time. I had left, and I'm pretty sure I was told to leave. Will followed it through and similar.
Was that awkward, Will, when Sean was asked to leave? Or were you the one that asked him?
I don't think it went down that way.
I was a young kid. It was far less dramatic than anything you could ever imagine. But it did give me the basis for what eventually was really my foundational building block of my career, which I went to a company called Efficient Networks, which there I was employee 100 or something like that. It was during the dot-com bubble. We were the largest DSL CPE manufacturer in the world. We had companies, all the RBOCs. That was when an RBOC was a thing. All the ILECs, all the other stuff. And being so early there, and as it was an emerging company, there was a lot of opportunity to just hustle your way in. And that hustle led me to basically a 3-ish year stint of back and forth to the Asia Pac region, doing a bunch of international business development, OEM, ODM work, international contract negotiations with our suppliers and manufacturers. It gave me a basis for a lot of different things that I attribute to how I was able to be successful. And then we ended up selling that company to Siemens in 2003. It was a big number, it was like $1.5 billion. I wish that was mine. It was not. But I was part of that era where they gave you a decent amount of, back then they were giving everybody stock for this and this and this and this. We had gone public during that time too. So I learned a little bit about the public markets and don't buy on margin. Saw a lot of nice cars being bought without cash, and then saw a lot of nice cars disappear. But it really was foundational. It really built.
That was my exposure to the repo man.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Your initial exposure was on the sales side, and you kept that element of business development, which is where the business end of it. Clearly, Will was the tinker, but you wanted to be a doctor, Will. Was that awkward when you have to tell your parents that you were just kidding about being a doctor? Did that come up at all?
It was more awkward to tell them that I was having a baby. It was funny when I told family friends I was going to school to be a doctor. One of them was a doctor, and he's like, "What are you, nuts? You don't want to be a doctor. Go work for your dad. He makes more money than I do." And it's one of those things that happened for a reason. I've told my own kids when we've talked about my journey with them. In many ways, I was very fortunate to have fallen into an industry that was very nascent. Very early, I was able to sort of slide in because there was no playbook. There were no courses. There was nobody. They weren't teaching these types of things. I just fell in there, found something that I was good at and that I actually enjoyed doing. And it's sustained me through the years, being able to do things that I truly do enjoy. I was very lucky.
What did your father do that was making more money than the doctor that told you you were stupid?
He was an insurance broker. He owned his own insurance agency. We have another brother, and he was hoping that one of us would take the business over. And when it became apparent that we weren't going to, he just said, screw it, and shut it down.
Is the other brother the CEO of Intel? Where's he?
So he's just working a normal job.
He's got the better life of all of us.
A civilian. So does he have hair?
It's starting to fade.
You asked about the expectations thing. Will and I were pretty lucky. Lucky is a relative term, but we were at least exposed to, my dad was a bit of a take some risk guy. My mom was the stable one. She's the nurse for 35, 40 years, whatever. So she kind of made sure we had insurance, and my dad would go chase the entrepreneurial stuff on some stuff. But it made us a little bit fearless.
To be clear, your mother was the one that made sure you had insurance, even though your dad was the one that was selling insurance?
It's ironic, isn't it? So
she had better benefits. Let's put it that way.
We didn't have any preset expectation. The expectation was when you turn 18, go do something. And if you're sitting at home, you cannot not do anything. So basically it was a get out, not with a foot, but with a life starting, go be something, go make yourself something. And some people would find that maybe harsh, but I actually found it more liberating. You didn't have time to mess around. You just had to go do something.
By that definition, by 18, it's pretty much an adult. By the legal definition now, it's an adult. So you're an adult, act like one, and go take care of things.
It was in that vein, though. It was more like you got responsibilities. Don't drag yourself down by sitting here being a dumbass. Excuse me.
And just in case you forgot that you were an adult, and then Will had a kid. To crystallize
I've tried ever since to say I'm not an adult. Most people that knew me back then went, he's definitely not an adult. But I had adult visions, so it's fine.
What can I say? Circle gets the square.
Yeah.
Sean, so Will had some sort of a career path, wanting to be a doctor, picked up biology, and then decided to come into spice.
Yep.
What was your dream? What was your career path before you got exposed to being in the tech sector?
I went to school, like I said, I had finance and banking and real estate degrees, and I naturally gravitated toward numbers. So I always thought I'd be in and around the banking space. I thought I might get there through one of the big four, maybe go work for like a Deloitte or something just to get that experience. But the reality of that was really a wanderer. I enjoyed being on the road. I enjoyed relationship building and all that. I really did think I was going to be on that banking side at some point, which ironically I did for a bit. When you get into this, and like I said, when I started traveling overseas for that first real foundational gig that I had, it really just lit a flame of like relationships are everything to me in the way that I structure how I've been successful. It's not cliche for me to say I've been surrounded by so many smart people. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, that room is in trouble. I promise you that. That with respect, I just have had the good fortune that my brain space around like what I wanted to do was just be around smart people that we could go do really interesting things with. I always wanted to have that entrepreneurial side to it as well. So surround yourself with smart people, go do something that you determine your own outcome. Those were like key drivers. I didn't have an exact, but I did know that like a fallback was I could always leverage the idea that I was really good with numbers. And I had that in my bag. The rest was like, let's go build something on top of that.
So having that entrepreneurial experience and the stability from your mom's side, right around the time when you guys both started your career, the boom hadn't happened. It was still sort of very Star Trek-ish. Tech is out there. It may or may not happen. There was a lot of naysayers. Now, looking back at it, of course, it's the right decision. But looking back at it, what made you enter into this sector not knowing how big it's going to get?
Well, for me, it was like I needed a job. I had a family I had to support, and I wasn't thinking that proactively, to be honest. It was cool. It was new. I had internet access in college, but it wasn't something that was ubiquitous, and it was still very niche. What really changed that and started to open my eyes more was Windows 95. made it easy to get on the internet. And then all of a sudden we saw this tremendous growth in demand. And it started this sprint for me where time moved very quickly because we were just so busy. Between the 4 years that I spent helping build that company, sell it. If you remember, during the dot-com years, there was a telecom deregulation. So we had this spring up of competitive telephone companies, these CLECs and stuff that popped up. And I got an opportunity to go build an IP network, an internet backbone for one of them. That 4 years went by super fast. The telecom bubble was bursting. And then we're sort of looking around at nuclear winter for the internet in general because of all these dot-coms that were going down. I got an opportunity to join a company with a friend who convinced me to come do this. And I thought it'd be a 6-month gig, and it turned into about 13 years of my life that went by tremendously quick. We caught lightning in a bottle there for that 13 years. That was the planet, Phil. And we were growing rapidly and got an opportunity to bring my little brother in. They were looking for someone to help on the sourcing side and procurement and things like that. And so we brought Sean in. He joined about a year after me. I can't remember.
I had to do the math on the years, but something like that.
It was crazy. And a lot of shit happened between then and the exit with IBM. Lots of tales to tell there too, but Sean made a good point earlier, which is I made this point when we sold Linode. We were sitting around talking about, I had only been with Linode a short period of time, was hired to help achieve an exit, take over some of the product development, software development, stuff like that, get the company into a state where it was ready to sell. We ended up doing it much faster. But in that short period of time, I told the management team there, you're fortunate in your career if you get to work with a team that just works well together. I've had that a couple times in my life. Feel very fortunate that I had it more than once, or that I even had it once, truthfully. But I related the time that we had at the Planet and Softlayer and the team there. We were all pretty good at our jobs, and we all knew our lanes, and we all complemented each other really well. Like Sean said, I feel very fortunate to have been surrounded by people like that throughout my career. And it might be luck, it might be that I chose well, but to me, that's been one of the more rewarding things is the people that I've been able to work with throughout the years.
But just on Nabeel's question about like what into this thing, Will's kind of alluding to it, but I don't sit well. I just enjoy pace.
Yeah.
And everything that I've touched in this sector, in this space, has allowed me to sprint and sprint with a purpose, not sprint like without a finish line, but more have really clear objectives of like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And if we don't do that, we're going to do this some more, we're going to do some more. And because of the pace of the industry at the time that, frankly, we built it. I don't mean that to be overly dramatic either, but we were a cloud before cloud was cool. Well, now cloud's just this operating entity that obviously we're all very, very much part of, but
Can I go one step further? You invented the goddamn cloud.
Yeah, we like that. I like that statement. So make sure I get some residuals, please. I'd like every penny spent sent to me. But I don't fit well with a playbook. I'm not the go do this thing 9 to 5 and make this thing happen. We'll hit on the head. When you find folks that you want to go to battle with, and you find that in a company and you your lanes, you're not jockeying this way for Politico stuff. You're just saying, we've got a common goal and we want to get to the end. And again, I've been fortunate with that for a couple of companies as well. I don't think that's common, right? And when you find it, one of the things I joke about, and maybe we'll get to it in this discussion, but if Softlayer, which was a couple companies later, was your first job ever, it may have ruined you because it was so much fun, had such a good culture. It was so closely knit that if that was your exposure to what work is, you probably got hit by a 2x4 on your next job.
Or
when IBM, right?
Right. There seems to be so many perfect storms that happened. You were in the right place at the right time, at the right segment of your career. And so much success is being willing to just take the path that is carved as you're walking, as opposed to having some preconceived notion. I'll also consider the suggestion that you guys are not fit for 9 to 5 as shade to brother number 3, who clearly is fit for 9 to 5. I'm just kidding.
He's military, ex-mil, right, and all that. So like his box He fits in it very well. That's not a
Perfect.
knock. And I very much appreciate people like that. I'm just not one of them.
The people like that are the ones that keep your sites operational. So
100%.
our world wouldn't work without them. But what's unique here beyond the perfect storm is that you guys somehow managed to, the timing just worked out where you did it together and you were each other's safety net in some way. Where it's one thing to suggest that you have a team that surrounds you that's all good and there's a yin and yang, but you can't make up for the balance that you have when you have this familial connection. It can either be the death of it, or you can fit together so well that the rest of the people you bring on board, there's that cliche when you're growing a company where you're like, this is a corporate family. We are a family. In your case, you really were a family, the two of you. And I have to imagine that people responded to the accessibility, the ease with which you guys interacted with one another. What is that practice?
I'll share a thought. Sean and I are not the same age, obviously. The fact that I'm 7 years older than Sean, we didn't have the sibling rivalry that some people have growing up because of that age difference. So for me, at least my personal perspective, Sean has different skill sets than I do. And we never found ourselves in each other's lanes very often, which allowed us to function very well together. And some of that has to do with the fact that growing up, it wasn't like my brother that's a year younger than me, where there was some rivalry there and I had to beat him down every once in a while, remind him who the older one was. We had a different dynamic. And I also think that Sean and I probably got more of that entrepreneurial gene than our other brother, but it made us alike in similar ways. And we're both willing to take chances. We're not risk averse necessarily. In my case, maybe I'm a little more measured. Sean's a little bit more daring than me on some of the risks that he takes. But what made us good in terms of how we interacted and worked together was the fact that we weren't competing against each other. We were working towards common goals. We're similar minded. We have similar outlooks on things. But again, we had different lanes we were in, and it allowed us to work well together. And in terms of the teams that we worked with, they recognized that as well. We just fit neatly together in the work endeavor. So at least that's my take. I don't know. Sean may see it differently, but I never felt like I was in competition with Sean. It was always more like, hey, like you said, we have a common goal. We're trying to build something here. It was fun. That helped. It was not fun too. Phil, to your point, in those not so fun times, the fact that we had family around maybe made it a little bit easier.
Will is very, very technically smart. And so from my perspective, if I ever had a question, even to this day, and I need an answer, I call him. I don't call anybody else. And so that's an easy one. Like, that's not a lane that I feel like a competitive imbalance there. Will's called me many times and said, hey, look at this investment thing that we're looking at, or we're talking to bankers or whatever. We can lob things off each other. But being that I was 7 years younger than him, when I was even before the planet, a lot of the people I was interacting with were peers of Will's at that time. And so you look at like Chris McFarland, who runs Master G's, longtime colleague and friend of Will's, I became a friend of his, right? And vice versa. So everybody has like this overlap of networks that are a little piece of the pie. I would say our overlap of networks is almost the same pie, but driven by different ways, right? And so when I went to work at the bank guys all knew Will when he was over at Linode. This cross-functional walk that we did, I was just 7 years behind him, but I got the luxury of meeting folks that he already had relationships with. There's probably a benefit to me in that. In the same light, there was no awkwardness in that. It was like, oh, you're all interrelated in some fashion, so go, right? You didn't spend the first 30 minutes trying to introduce yourself. You just said, hey, I'm this, and they went, oh, well, it sucks for you. Let's go. And then you went.
The complementary nature of your angles is so perfectly complementary. There's of course overlap in the networks, but a complete complementary nature to your vantage point and perspective that it just seems like it was almost a perfect storm that started at home. And then it just worked itself out when you had this vehicle, which was this industry that was coming of age that you really could have started at any point. There was no particular, you couldn't, if you wanted to, have created the path that you ended up going on because it didn't exist. So it's just an amazing journey. We just spent some time talking about that, the Planet to Softlayer to IBM experience, because it's such an incredible story. I'll let you guys frame it and focus on it so we don't turn this into like a 17-hour recording. You guys really laid the foundation for what became the cloud. If folks out there don't know what the Planet and what Softlayer ended up becoming, it was the first, let's call it almost automated bare metal provisioning service that ever was. And it became the thing that everyone that was trying to create a similar type of business looked to as that shining light, as evidenced by the fact that it was the acquisition that IBM made to try to play in the cloud space as a way to compete with Amazon, Google, Oracle, not at that time maybe, but what Oracle now is, DigitalOcean. So this original thing, how does that idea come up? How does that whole thing come together? Inspire us all, please.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab at it, but Will's deeply entrenched in the nucleus of what the Planet was, even way before I got there, from a technical perspective, right? Putting it all together. I had, on the heels of selling that company to Siemens, it was a big number back in the early 2000, $1.5 billion. And although there wasn't all my money, like I said, but I had learned a bunch of stuff there, both on the business side from a vendor management perspective, relationship management perspective, but also on some of the money raising ties there. So there was a natural opportunity when the Planet was in 2002 or 2003. It was one of these classic, we're growing so fast we can't afford to grow. We had a CapEx business, you had to fund that, and you're like, oh crap, we're growing so fast, I don't have enough money to buy the stuff. Lance Crosby was over there with Will, an iconic figure in the space back then as well. And we worked with him, and he was like, hey, we can go figure this out. And so I had a bridge on both sides, but I was at the later stage of that evolution, which was, hey, can you help us with our financing? And that's both vendor financing and all that, but then also the VC world and the private equity world, if there's opportunities there, why don't you do that as well, right? So I came in with a broad brush opportunity in like late 2003, and that growth continued, and we had opportunities come on one side with the vendor financing, which was good. We struck a crazy deal. Mike Jones, our old CFO, who was also my CFO at Softlayer, would joke, we raised money every day for about 9 years straight. I'll take 25 grand here, I'll take 50 grand, but it's what you do when you do it. Maybe the divergent is something a lot of people that know us know, but maybe the broader spectrum doesn't, which is around the end of 2004, there was a critical point in the company from the Planet's perspective around ownership and structure and all this other stuff. And it really spurred a divide between myself and a few other founders that went over and started Softlayer and the Planet itself. And we can have beers at some point with anybody who wants to reach out on that. It created a divide, which was in essence, the rationale base for why Softlayer started. We were not competitive with them, but we understood the dynamic of that space. It was Rackspace at the top, Planet down below, and we were this middle layer that we thought we could forge an army towards. And just that all the nucleus of that came about. We went off, started Softlayer. We parallel moved this way. Obviously, a lot of competition in that as well, both structurally, but also just from a market perspective. And then we looked up in 2009 and said, hey, we're $150 million in recurring revenue. You're $150 million in recurring revenue. If we put this thing together, the 1 + 1 may equal a bunch. And that's how these two entities came together, align those two things, optimize over the next couple of years, and got that up to 550, nearly $600 million of recurring revenue in a 7-year span. You don't do that by accident. You do that by two functional companies that are doing very well at it. The competition spurred us when we were separate, and then when we put it together, we just had this aligned mission. But the reality was, it was that base for like, holy cow, we're building something that we knew was going to be very big. But the thoughtfulness in how we built it was really interesting, which was, this wasn't just a bunch of manual operations. Everything we did was measured. We automated everything. We were able to push button on an instance, be able to tell all kinds of stuff about the business. And when we took this Softlayer out to market, we had more than ever, and this is even a future state of readiness, compliments from our bankers, from potential acquirers about how readily available the information about the business was, is because we built the operating system to run the business. And that was even after the combined entities.
Where did that idea come from?
I can go back So when I joined the Planet was originally like a co-location company. So they had acquired a data center from the ashes of the dot-com bust. They were able to actually get paid cash to take over a data center in Dallas. And the idea was, oh, we're going to get into this co-location business. And I joined the company because they were having some scale issues, just trying to manage the network and stuff like that. So they asked me to come in and help fix that. The genesis of entering into that business, and I wish Lance were here to validate this, because I'm going to tell it the way I remember it, and maybe you can fact check me with Lance. But one of the things we were grappling with was like, how do we pay the rent on this thing? And there was a company here in Houston called Everyone's Internet that was selling dedicated servers, and they were growing like gangbusters. And we're like, well, we've got all this data center space.
EV1, if you remember those guys, EV1.
They were Everyone's Internet. So we were like, well, let's do that. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. We'll carve out some space in this data center to stand up some of these servers in, and that'll help us make rent and everything else. And then on the side, Lance was the driving force behind what Sean was talking about, which was like, hey, in order to scale this, we need to have a ticketing system. So the Orbit, which was our back office, was originally intended to be a customer ticketing system. However, so it's funny how things change. So fast forward, I thought when I took this job, I'd fix everything and then leave in 6 months. Of course, 13 years later, I was finally giving my resignation. The business shifted because that dedicated server, dedicated hosting business that we were using as a crutch to help us get into a better financial position to cover our overhead became the business. And we realized really early on that there was no way to scale that business the way we were doing it. We were building servers on the floor of our NOC. I was hand installing operating systems. I couldn't keep up on the network configuration stuff. So there were a couple other folks at the Planet then, Nathan Day, Sam Flightman, Matt Chillick. We sat in a room and said, we got to automate some of this stuff. And so we started with the network, and we automated the network configuration first. And then we're like, man, it'd be really cool if we could get these OSs to get automatically installed. And then we tackled that. And then little by little, we added capabilities and features to Orbit, and it eventually became, as Sean called it, like the operating system of the business. It was pretty advanced, frankly. It had all of our inventory management, all of our automation was in there. It was the heart of the business, frankly, and it was the engine that drove growth in the business from a technical standpoint. Before we knew it, we'd filled that data center up with servers. We thought it would be a colo data center. All of a sudden it's full of servers. And we're going out and leasing other data centers, and we're filling those up, and we're filling those up, and filling those up. And Sean makes a good point. We raised capital so quickly, we just couldn't afford to continue growing the business. It was a ridiculous time, frankly. We went from, I want to say $5 million a year in revenue to $65 million a year in revenue in a year and a half. And the balance sheet was horrible. It was crazy. It was a fun, frenetic, soul-sucking time where I wouldn't trade it for anything. I look back and I tell people all the time, in the moment, you don't always realize what's going on and how much fun you're having and how much you enjoy working with the people that you work with in that moment. It's not till later when you get a little space away from it, and maybe you're in a different situation, you're grinding in a different way, and you look back and you're like, man, that was a lot of fun. And those were great people. And those times, there were tough times and there were great times, and you miss those times. It's one of those things where in the moment, you don't always appreciate things that you're doing because you're just so focused and you're so heads down and you're working 18, 20-hour days and you're missing stuff with your family to try and build this thing. I was fortunate that I shared it with my family for part of that time, and we got to do a lot of that stuff together. And again, it's one of those things that growing up, you don't think, oh God, someday I'll get to grow up and work with my brother, right? And that'll be great. That's not exactly what most kids think when they're growing up. They want to get away from the people that they grew up with. I feel very fortunate that we were able to share that together. Like Sean said, over beers, we can talk about the bad times too, but ultimately being reunited with that team felt like going full circle, and being able to finish it, what we had started, felt very good.
Is this where you want me to cue the crying, or what? Where you want?
I could see you welling up. It's happening, guys. It's happening.
Let's romanticize all the shitty work I did.
One of the things that we try to talk about with the Nomad Futurist Foundation is this concept of giving the younger generation a 30,000-foot view of all the things of our industry. And what you guys created without even knowing it was basically like a concentrated lesson in all things digital infrastructure. You had the connectivity part of it, the real estate part of it, the power, the distribution of the power, the putting together of the actual servers that created the compute, the connecting of those servers and provisioning of all of them, and that visibility into that. It's really difficult to even understand where you would get that type of exposure today with what the current cloud platforms are. To me, it's seemingly a lesson that we have to now make an effort to teach the younger generation about all of the different layers, not just the OSI layer, which is the fundamental elements of it. It comes from there's a building, and from that building to the time that someone has a website on a server that is communicating about what their small business sells, and everything in between is what you guys not only learned on the fly, but built automation for. Just the visibility that gives you into our industry. It's just mind-boggling to me.
This may parallel to what you're saying, but I was at PTC this year. Will was there too, and you guys were out there. One of the things that struck me was there's a whole bunch of people trying to get in this space, and it's changed from one banker, one lawyer 10 years ago at PTC to 50% bankers and 50% lawyers. And what that means is that the industry has grown into something that is now a mainstay. It is really the foundation of that digital infrastructure and that digital environment, which you mentioned. The interesting part to me is that you guys know this, and you know all the names in the industry over the last 20, 25 years. The people running these companies, many of them are those people. And the observation I have is that there are all these people out there with, I'm a land banker, or I bought land, or I got access. Nobody has the 25 years of relative experience. And I just question, is anybody going to be able to run these companies? And I say that with respect to, of course they are. They're smart people. They'll find people to run them. But that grit that you talk about, I guarantee you there's nobody running those companies that have ever built a server. I can guarantee you that nobody was on that midnight answering a tech support call, not being a technical person, praying that somebody didn't call and go like, don't ask me too much because I can't answer that. But that foundation of building that came from doing it, being in it. And the education part that you guys are trying to promote in that is significantly important as it relates to bridging that gap to like real world experience and that do it work versus bringing in high profile people who are coming from large companies saying, I want to be the COO or CEO of this data center company that has land, money, hasn't really ever done it. And that's an interesting proposition in my head that I'm challenged with.
To your original point, I would say an engineer coming into the industry these days is walking into something completely different than engineers did 20 years ago. The automation that we built, all of that was unique. Now you can get it out of the box. There's orchestrators that are open source. You can build a company easily from a technical standpoint using off-the-shelf software that exists now that didn't exist back then. And a lot of the magic for us was figuring that out and building that. So in the field I started in, which was more network engineering, if I had to be a network engineer today, I would be terrible because I didn't learn some of the foundational skills that I hire network engineers with these days, which is this overlay of software development and architecture and hardware, but not just protocol level stuff, which is where I excelled, was in the protocol level stuff and in the architecture stuff. But nowadays, you got to be able to write all the glue, all the software that ties all of this together. You have to interface with the hardware on a whole different level. The skill sets change. The entire industry has changed, frankly. That evolution is critical. Dan Golding wrote a great article on LinkedIn the other day where he talked about the type A network killer, which I thought was hysterical. But to Sean's point is like, when you look at what's going on in the data center industry specifically, you've got people with money, they own land, they want to develop data centers. They're looking in these weird places because, oh, the land's cheap, the power's cheap, but they tend to overlook the things that are critical to the businesses that are going to use these spaces. What's your proximity to major internet hubs and things like that? The point Sean was making is that it takes a wider set of skills than just being like a real estate person or a lawyer or a finance guy. Getting all that under one roof is difficult. And being able to pull the depth of experience again, and this is where I go back to sort of the team chemistry, because being able to find people who are willing to sit in a room, and again, you're all smart. Everybody's smart in that room. But for each of you to understand sort of what you bring, that's to me the challenge in building anything these days. It's not so much technology anymore. The tech's gotten a lot easier than it used to be. It's the business model, it's the operating model, it's being able to build like scalable processes. Those are the bigger challenges from my standpoint, coming at it from a technical angle, because so many of the original technical hurdles are now, they don't exist as much as they used to. Now it's more about scale and things like that.
Would you say, based on that, and that's for both of you guys, that opportunities still exist because challenges are still there, yet they're not the similar challenges that we encountered early part in our career? And what would you tell the younger generation? Like, let's just assume that we are starting ground zero today and we've got similar opportunities as you guys had 25 or so years ago. Is this still a viable sector to get into? And if so, what are the areas that the next generation should be looking at?
Shockingly, yes, it is. We tend to believe we've solved all the problems or everything cool has already been done, but that's not even close to accurate. And I don't know where the current wave, the AI wave, is going to end up. It bears a lot of resemblances to the early .com era, but out of that wreckage came a lot of really cool stuff. And so even if they avoid that collapse, there's a ton of opportunities, both from an infrastructure standpoint. There's still challenges in infrastructure, technology, software. There's a lot we haven't done yet, right? And there's a lot that can still be done. And there's always new and interesting ways to approach problem sets. And so that the opportunity is just as big now as it ever was, in my opinion. Maybe more so because some of those early challenges we've sort of overcome. And now we can get away from sort of the nuts and bolts of how to build all this infrastructure to support these new things. The sky's the limit, frankly.
I've always viewed the space as a digital manufacturing facility. And if you think about it in that construct, about it from the business side in that world, which is manufacturing is still strong today. I know you can go different ways when you hear what's going on in the world, but the reality of this foundation being the center point for how people get things online, how people build things, how people disperse things. You're talking about software as a service as a dominant factor. Guess what? Software as a service doesn't reside anywhere except a data center. The cloud isn't really a freaking cloud. It's a physical footprint that really underpins basically how the world interacts with each other from a digital perspective. And so I look at that from an opportunity side that basically says there's a bunch of key elements. You got the true infrastructure side. So if your kid doesn't want to be a technical person, but understands the physical footprint of this, being around the data center space, you could be HVAC, electrician, you could physical, all this stuff, that it's a huge demand, huge boom that's going on. The system side, you need systems that can drive all those things from a integration piece from all the way from that critical infrastructure through the systems. You talk about like an interesting combination. There are people that do nothing but write code that have, now you're talking about smart UPSs, you're talking about smart generators, you're talking about smart everything. You're aggregating that data, and then you're able to produce something from the output perspective. And then there's all the opportunity on top of that. And you can go up and down the stack around managed services. You can talk about specialization. You can talk about all kinds of stuff. AI is just a different form of the digital output that still utilizes the infrastructure that we're talking about. So for me, there's all kinds of stuff. And I say this with all respect to how it may sound strange, but it's blue collar to white collar and everything in between, which is a unique statement because there's not many industries that have that. And so from an opportunity perspective, I've been fortunate to be around a lot of international places. They have very strong vocational skill-based education. This opportunity can go everywhere from there all the way to the highest grade degree that you can get. And those two people interplay within this ecosystem. And again, that just creates opportunity. And it's rich with, if you want to train yourself to be something in this space, there is a place for you. And I can't imagine that anybody looks up and goes, well, there's just no jobs there. There's plenty of jobs.
If we wanted to replace Nabeel and myself on the masthead of the Nomad Futurist Foundation, the Charnock brothers could easily take it over because you are
Absolutely.
preaching to the ultimate choir. I remember I did a little STEAM presentation for my son is 12. So last year he was in 5th grade and they had a STEAM day where they had parents come in and talk about their careers. And I found one article that I put up from 1999, just before the bubble was going to burst, where it was like front page New York Times, the internet is just a fad. And that's so comical now because there is no element of our lives that are not like 100% beholden to
Right.
the fact that the internet works.
So it's like you have to have internet to function in today's.
There's a funny video that you just reminded me of, Phil, and Will and I are good at cutting people off, so excuse our voice. But
I'm the third brother, don't forget.
I can see it in my head, but it's like Katie Couric talking to Bryant Gumbel and talking about what is this WW World Wide Web thing? And it wasn't that long ago. And it just shows you from where we started to where we are today. You can't do anything without what we're talking about here. It's a pretty amazing 20 years, 25 years, because I don't necessarily know that anything has disrupted the world like this has disrupted the world.
And this is just the beginning of time.
I tell people all the time, like they're like, what do you do? And I try to explain it. It's difficult. It's an abstract idea to explain to people the work that like I do, for instance. So I always default to like the internet. I work on the internet. Hopefully
Which some are still trying to figure out.
we're still out. Hopefully this pays off. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm just trying to create something for my kid brother to work in.
So history has a tendency of repeating itself. Centralized, decentralized computing, cloud or not to cloud ends up being a topic of discussion. We have lived through the dot-com boom and the bust. And looking just back at it for a short time over here, it was roughly about 3 to 5 years, give or take, that boom to bust, and the economy is shattered. Artificial intelligence sort of picked up about a year and a half, 2 years ago, right after COVID came to a screeching halt, and we figured out what was wrong with the world. To now where we're at today with the markets just flooded. Where we're at with artificial intelligence today and the hype that it's created and the market and the saturation that there is now, do you believe, are there any potential possibilities of a bust in the next year and a half to 2?
I don't think it's at the infrastructure layer, personally. I actually think it's at the application layer. And it's the 2000, 2003 where the business models were flawed. And that's why you saw the bust. It's the old joke of the Super Bowl commercial put you in peril. But if you went back and looked at the Super Bowl commercials, who they had shitty business models. Just call it what it was. And so anybody chasing AI that doesn't actually have a pragmatic business plan that follows it, but more chasing the dollar for the dollar's sake, and I've got 1,000 GPUs, I'm going to go try and make a market, but don't have a business plan, it's a flaw. There are really emerging companies that are going to do well. And there's going to be a bunch of people that fall by the wayside, which are the folks that are trying to find lightning in a bottle, but without the work, if that makes sense. To me, I don't necessarily see a bust. I see companies being left behind because inevitably a flawed business model works for about the first 12 minutes, and then the next 6 hours of your life is hell trying to figure out what did I just do and where'd all the money go. You'll see a bunch of that. But I don't think at the infrastructure layer or at the foundational piece, there's a really good balance of like this world is not going away, but some of the applications that people are bringing to it might.
I agree somewhat. We're in that early wave where there's a rush to investment. There's not always the revenue side to match the investment side. And that jury's still out. At some point, what you'll see is companies reassessing the investment and the level of investment. And similar to what happened in the dot-com years, Sean makes good points. Some of these companies they were stupid, frankly. Again, I've said this before, out of those ashes rose new industries that took sort of that foundation that was laid by, you had big investments in network, you had big investments in data center. One of the things that we were able to springboard off of was the fact we were able to get this asset that would have cost a lot of money and build a business utilizing that asset, which allowed us to sort of lay the foundation for Softlayer and everything else. So in any initial wave, you're going to have money that gets burnt and investors that lose money and investors that make money and things like that. What's going to be more interesting to me isn't the inevitable, some industries, some companies collapse as a result of some of this. It's really more what comes behind it. Like, what do we do with it when the dust is settled from whatever happens? How do we turn this into something interesting? How do we apply those lessons, take some of that work that's been done now and figure out how do you turn these into real businesses that people will reach into their wallets, pull a dollar out. Because that was one of the jokes Lance and I used to, and the other folks at the plan used to say was, what business are we in? Whatever gets a dollar out of someone's wallet, that's pretty much what we're chasing. In many ways, that's going to drive that second wave of whatever comes after this initial first wave of AI investments. So I tend to be more optimistic than pessimistic when it comes to this stuff, but I'm wary in the first wave of anything, frankly. Sean and I are a little different in that mindset, in that I'm a little bit more conservative sometimes in the way that I look at this stuff. But I agree that with his point about the infrastructure layer and the investments going on around there, we know there's a lack of power, for instance. That cloud business is still chugging along, and it's still consuming all of these assets. AI is a component of it. So even if that bubble bursts, we're so much better insulated these days than we were back then. There's a handful of companies that are overexposed. They'll either rise or fall. But as an industry, it's much stronger than it was in 2002, 2003.
As evidenced by the fact that the internet is clearly not a fad.
Correct.
If Bill Gates could be wrong in 1993, we are okay. Well, you should be okay. This is certainly very, very interesting. I love the conversation. We can actually have a phase 2 or phase 3 of this episode.
I haven't gotten into Linode. I haven't gotten into faction and talking trash about Luke. There's a million things. Damn it.
This needs to end up being a series on its own. We're going to have to do it again. But what would you tell the younger you if you were to do this all over again, knowing what today?
Take more risks. One of the great things for me in the initial exit that I had way back in the day was it empowered me to take more risks, and it freed me up from sort of that fear that holds a lot of people back, frankly. It's cliche to say it, but nothing great ever comes from playing it safe. Let's just put it that way. In Vegas, they say no balls, no black chips. So sometimes you got to take that risk. You got to take that chance. And that's how you earn that reward. And I've seen lots of people, peers in my industry, for instance, that never felt like they were empowered to take the chances that they would have liked to have taken. But I would tell anybody, there are moments, there are windows in your life where opportunity comes. And if you're unwilling to take that chance, you're never going to reap the rewards, frankly. And so looking back, I'd tell myself, take more chances. I took chances, but they were very measured. A friend of mine in the banking world always tells me that what he respects about my career choices is I always vetted those very well. I always went and did a lot of due diligence before I took the jobs. I wouldn't say that about the planet. That was more of an opportunistic thing, but they were calculated risks for me. Again, if I could go back and give myself one piece of advice, to be like, maybe calculate a little less and take a few more risks, because there were definitely opportunities I passed that would have paid out pretty well.
Just more pragmatic to the question on the space particularly, I would say don't underestimate the things that are part of the system, to only go towards the things that you like about the system. What by that is, earlier days, I didn't take time to necessarily learn the inner workings of like the HVAC systems, the generators, the UPS stuff, because I didn't understand that it was all interconnected over time. Like if I could see the future, even if I wanted to be on this side of the ledger as it relates to like more on the technical side, the business side, those core components are such an integral part of the overall schema that I would have liked to have done well enough to learn that over time, but I would have liked to have spent more time on it, really understanding the implications to things like nowadays power is like a finite resource. Understanding the why part of that would have been a lot more handy had I done that earlier in my career than later. And that's just an example. If I had a bunch of students in front of me, I would give them the full spectrum of why the thing you probably think about the least might matter as a core component to what the most you want to get out of it. I would give myself a talking to. Don't dismiss the parts for the entirety. And this industry has really tied that together.
Brilliant. Well, we've got to do this again, hopefully in person at some point in time with those beers, Sean and Will, that you were talking about. A key takeaway, and what really, really resonates with me, my dad used to tell me one thing: if you don't risk anything, you risk everything, but do take those calculated risks. And education is the most important thing here. And gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're going to have to do this again.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Hello, welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is Nabeel Mahmood, your co-host, calling in from Manila, Philippines.
This is your co-host, Phillip Koblence, still in Montclair, New Jersey.
This is Will Charnock. I'm outside of Houston, the north side.
John Charnock, places unknown, not allowed to talk about it.
Very secret.
Well, Sean, we already know where you're at. That was the first phase of the podcast. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to join us again. This is the second session phase of your podcast.
Yeah, the only other time I recall us having a part two was just people that are significantly older than you that just have this crazy duration of experience. The amount of insight that you guys have had over the course of your career, having just kind of fallen into it, it's impossible to cover in one. I'm not positive we can cover it in two, but where we left off in the first one is you guys had just exited Softlayer, which was a labor of love that brought you guys, that had started your career in two different areas. You brought you guys together to create this wonderful thing. And it's rare that we get to understand the progression of when you start something, you transact on it, and then you have this incredible wealth of experience that you can then take and spread out across all of these other companies and interests. And we started talking in the kind of pre-interview about different investments that you're able to make because now you have the fruits of your labor, essentially, to sow your royal oats. Maybe that's a bit much. So take us through that, What is it like? You just exited this company. You got this payday that I can't imagine you had expected when you started your careers. And then what happens the next day, the next week, the next month?
I'll be brutally honest with you, though. I went off and told somebody
On the payday part,
you wake up the next day, you look at your bank account about 10 times, and then you go, wow, nothing's changed. Let's go. Let's keep going. Not to sound kitschy on that by any means, but the battle of it is still kind of the upshot. I felt, as you're talking about things that we've gone off and done and things, that foundational piece, I've at least felt this way. Will may have a different view on it, but I kind of feel like there's no problem that can get thrown at me that would be any harder than what I had to go through there. Not because it wasn't super successful and we did all the right things. We didn't do all the right things. We made bad choices in certain areas. You falter, you quickly respond, but it's really helped me think about my relationships with folks from a employment standpoint, from a investor mentor perspective, from an entrepreneur perspective. I've always felt a little different in rooms with just pure investors, or if I'm in rooms with advisors who are at larger companies that have kind of made their career there, versus having a really kind of one-on-one kind of mental connection with somebody who's doing it like we did it. I've always felt like I've had a different view with entrepreneurs where they trust me a little differently, or they give me some credence towards like, I want you in the room because you've done this, you've had these hard choices, and you've made some mistakes, but boy, you made a lot of good choices too. And that's a foundation of the stuff that we did. And even to this day, I could probably name 10 things that happened last week that I would look back to those days that I'm able to reference, or at least take my learnings or findings, good and bad, and put it into practice. I'm sitting on a board of a company right now that is in the throes of some really interesting financing. And I'm all the way back to 20 years ago saying like, what were we thinking? How were we thinking about it? What are the pros and cons? You get away from big numbers and you just start thinking about implication. It's really served me well over the last, whatever it is, 10, 15 years since.
It's hard to believe it's been that long. Will, what are you thinking? Like on the other side of a transaction, do you feel as though you know that I can do it now? Like, did you feel like you were more credible as a consequence of having transacted? It's not like you transacted with Ma and Pa Kettle. You sold to IBM. I'm not sure that there could be more of a Goliath to have sold to. So from a credibility perspective, it's just off the charts. Do you feel different after that transaction, just from a experiential or otherwise?
Good question. I don't know that I felt different necessarily. What I felt was more like unshackled in some ways. Sean's, it's funny when he said that, like, he's right. You do look at your bank account, 5 or 6 times and you're like, oh, okay. But then like for me, I went to work and I kept working, and it didn't really change much about my life. For me, what it enabled was an ability to do some things, take some chances, and explore some things that I kind of always wanted to do without necessarily worrying about the downsides as much as I had up until that point, right? I was the sole provider for my family. So a lot of the decisions I made and the work decisions that I made were centered around ensuring that my family had what they needed, and then I was providing for them. And post-transaction, the mindset became more about, okay, I don't really have to prove anything to anyone, and I'm not shackled to this job the way that I once was. So maybe I can flex a little bit and start using some different parts of my brain that perhaps I haven't always necessarily been able to use because I had a job. It was my scope was here. And even though I may have wanted to contribute in other ways, I had a great team around me. I didn't have to, but this gave me a little more freedom and flexibility to spread my wings a little bit more and take a few more risks in my life.
You see, given the fact that you both stayed in the same kind of industry circles, notice that people up and down, cross vertical, doesn't matter, they're finance or law, you dealt with them all as successful executives. And then on the other side of a transaction, did you notice people treating you differently post-transaction that you would not have otherwise? I'm sure everyone always treated you with respect, but did you notice like a different perspective that maybe people approached you with post-transaction?
For me, I don't think so. When I look back, some of the advice I give friends when they have an exit, for instance, is that they already have a friend circle and that they don't necessarily need more friends than what they already have, because there's always a danger when somebody sees your name in a news release or they associate you with something that happened. People do come out of the woodwork, people you haven't heard from or talked to for a long time. And the amount of entitlement they feel to what you earned is astounding. Sean and I were talking about this one time when our dad was still alive, and our parents overheard us talking about this, and they were like, that can't be true. Sean and I were like, that's 100% true. But in my professional life, for the most part, I'd say no. People still, they knew who I was. They knew the kind of person I was. And like I said, the friends that I had before were still my friends after. And I don't know, maybe we were raised to be grounded in a certain way. And I thank my parents for that, for sort of establishing us that confidence that we didn't, at least I didn't feel a need to go seek out new friendships and change the way that I lived.
You think it helped that you had each other? So you still had somebody that also had similar success that still called you a putz, and you still called him.
We kept each other in check, probably a little, maybe. Yeah, I looked at the people around us that we had been working with for a decade. We were mostly all very similar. Most of us, we worked at the job because we enjoyed it and we liked working with the people that we worked with. And now about those folks, some stopped working and some have continued to work. From what I can tell, most of them didn't really change. They stayed the same, and we did too. And the folks around us, at least in my case, my support system, my friends and my confidants, if you will, they were excited for me and for the teams and everything. Nothing really changed.
That's amazing. One of the questions that I have leading into is, there's 3 stages of this. You started a business, you're in the business, and then you exit it. Starting a business is never really an easy task. You've got a lot of pressure. Well, we've got to really make it happen and potentially have a good enough exit. And whilst you're in the middle of it, part of the challenge is that you end up developing this tunnel vision. And upon exit, okay, we've done it, been there. It was a good chain of events. Now looking back at it, do you think that you are or were a bit more comfortable in going through that experience and sharing it with your friends and consulting and or seeking an advisory board, that you have that sense of freedom that, okay, everything is achievable, it's within reach, basically? Has that perspective changed versus when you're in the middle of it, like, oh my gosh, we got to really make it happen and we got to work hard and we got to put all the time and effort into it, versus where you're at now?
At least from my side, it really didn't change kind of the friend set or like the community. The community stayed the community. Nobody gave a shit if we made a lot of money. They did care that we were successful. And that community was the community we come out of, Will and myself, and this technology community is highly encouraging of each other. Everybody wants everybody to be successful. It's not a tone of like, why you, not me, all that other stuff. And I found that really compelling. The second piece is, I did get a lot of new inquiries from people who
hey, you got a lot of money. Why don't you put money into this? Why don't you do this? Without relevance towards like, what it did for me is it allowed me to call BS a lot. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you got an idea and it's easy to use someone else's money when you don't really care about that, what that is. But when you're doing it with the people that we were doing it with, we did care. There was an importance factor that we weren't just raising money to raise money to go spend it. It was, why are you doing what you're doing? And are you using it like your own checkbook mentality? And so the outside friendships come from that. Back to your statement of like the community piece or the kind of post piece, it does give you some perspective on just really understanding that there are going to be people that still bring opportunities to you. I do a ton of deals with friends and all this, but they always preface it as this: I don't care if you do it or not, I'm doing it. So I thought I'd show it to you. Or I don't know if I want to do it. You're smart at this thing and I'm not. And so there's a good community of like that because we all felt like we brought something to the table that was unique. And so we leveraged that. And I always find it interesting on some of the deals that I look at where you got a really smart founder, and then a bunch of hired people. And the dynamic in that really feels lonely to me. I don't know how a better way to say it, but there's nobody to like, they always say when you make it to the top, you're the loneliest person in the world because you got nobody to look side to side and go, who's up here with me? I kind of feel like that with some of these investments I see. People are coming in and going, I just need somebody to talk to. I don't have any peers because nobody knows what the hell I'm doing here. I appreciate that we didn't have yes men around us. We had a lot of no men, and not to be kitschy, but like no with the purpose of like prove it, not yes because you're the guy that, right? I feel like that made us better at our overall jobs. Like we make good decisions because of that. The other thing was you said something about, there's a kind of a saying in the early guys' crew about, we all want to be rich and famous, but nobody really gives a shit about the famous part. There's a few of us that did care about the famous part. That's probably neither of us, but at the end of the day,
not yet. Wait until this gets released, and you guys can't walk down the street.
You'll be both rich and famous.
Semi-famous, stuff like that. The infamous, but the rich part was more a relation to the successful part versus the actual dollars that come along with it. And nobody really cared that if their face was going to be on the cover of, I don't know, Vogue magazine or whatever, Entrepreneur magazine or whatever. But that semblance of like, let's just go be successful was definitely tied into that. And I carried that forward too. Like, do the right thing for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons. And you typically surround yourself with good people that want to do that too.
So you said something that actually really hit a home run with me, that you guys did not really look into the yes man culture, but the no man culture. Could you expand a little bit on that? Because we've built the yes man culture in corporate world, whereas I believe that no man culture, that's no man, is an opportunity to prove internally, to sell internally first that this idea would work, and then take it out to the external network and to the marketplace. So how'd you guys go about that within your organization?
Will's probably got like a tie in here on one side, but I would just maybe just to piggyback the last piece of what I said, which is everything had to be proven because my dollar is your dollar. That was the mentality. Like, these are our dollars. These are your dollars and your dollars. These are our dollars. And as much as we realize how hard it is to get those dollars, that's from outside folks, that's from all arenas, we were just 100% grokked on challenge. Like, do not do because, hey, I got a great opportunity. Can't answer why. You really don't have a great opportunity. You better come with some data. You better come with some facts. And we were really hard on each other about like, don't bring me this BS that you got a great opportunity here unless you actually can prove it. And that culture is one of accountability. And we were hugely accountable to the business as like the business being the thing. And we're all part of that thing, but we aren't the thing. It's the business is the thing, and you got to be accountable to it. That's my view. I don't know. Will thinks about that too.
What you're saying makes sense. The accountability thing, we were accountable to each other as much as anything else. One of the things that I've taken away in general is, the great ideas can come from anywhere. And that was one of the more interesting aspects looking back, is that we did occasionally, a great idea was inspired out of somewhere that you maybe didn't expect it to come from, right? It could be a technical guy with a business idea, or it could be, it usually wasn't like a technical guy with a finance idea or anything, but we also, we challenged each other intellectually. Like, if we wanted to change something, that prove it mentality was there. It was like, okay, well, you say this doesn't work as well as it could. Show me a better way of doing it. And I try to run my current teams with that sort of approach where if you have a great idea, let's hear it and let's challenge it and let's question it. You have to come at it from multiple angles, ask all the questions. Well, what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? And that culture is what breeds sort of success in the long run, is that you don't accept the status quo. I joke all the time that I worked a few places in my career where if I ask you why something is a certain way and you tell me because it's always been that way, that's not a great answer, frankly.
You're fired.
Well, the joke was we'd fire you for those types of, Lance may have talked about firing people for those types of things back in the day, but it's the truth. Always challenging norms, not accepting status quo, understanding that while you may have built something good, it could still be improved upon. And that's a good culture to bring to any org, regardless of whether it's technology or whatever. Accepting sort of mediocrity, because that's the way. It's tough for me mentally to do that even today. I just had a conversation last week with my boss about something similar. And I was sort of like, am I crazy? Am I the crazy one here? I see these things I want to fix, and sometimes it's hard to get other people to see it as the problem that I see it. And as I tell young engineers and even seasoned engineers who work for me, in an engineer's mind, the best idea should always win. But that's not always the way that it works. You have to sell those ideas. We're in a marketplace of ideas, if you want to think of that. And so you may have a better way of doing something. If it requires work from other people, you have to get good at selling them on doing that work. Like, what are they going to get out of it? Again, tying into the yes man, no man thing, it's like, it wasn't like no, hard no. It was no, like Sean said, prove it, bring the facts, show me what you mean, and defend it. Almost like a PhD kind of thing, where you have to defend your thesis kind of thing. You bring this idea, you better have good facts to back up the idea, or there's enough people here with enough smarts to call bullshit on you, if you will, and we will. We hold each other accountable in that way.
I want you guys to go ask the two friends I have somewhere, if you can find them. They're probably written on the wall somewhere, but because it's always been this way, or because that's the way it's always been done, is definitely fireable. And the other one is not my job. If you talk to anybody that I've led after those days, if someone tells me that it's not my job, puts kind of a stake in the ground that you may not be long for.
Not a big fan of buck passing. Sean Charnocks, not a big fan of passing a buck.
I can name some examples of folks who paid the price for the not my job.
Go on.
He's not going to do it.
I won't. But I could. That's in his book.
I have two questions that are seemingly unrelated. One is just out of morbid curiosity. After you guys sold, given how long you worked together, was there a conscious effort to go your separate ways and just kind of do that? Did that end up just working out that way because of the way your careers materialized, or not?
I can't speak for Sean, not on my part. And Sean actually left before the transaction. So he had already sort of moved along and made a decision that it was time for him to move along. So shortly before the transaction, he had already exited. But Phillip, we chased different things, but that's not to prove anything or because I didn't like working. I actually enjoyed it a lot. Back on those days fondly. But no, nothing conscious going on there for sure. Maybe there's some unconscious stuff working. I don't know.
We'll have to do hypnosis.
I agree, because we're two real kind of different disciplines from a thinking perspective, but also kind of do work together a lot because we've invested in some similar things. He's called me a few times and said, hey, I have this thing. I need to do this thing. What do you know? I've done the same thing backwards to him, although not in kind of the same W-2 role. I would say that we have a conscious kind of view as to like, hey, you're really smart at this and I'm not, help me, and vice versa. And essentially that's working together, right? At the end of the day for our relationship.
That's accurate. We've leaned on each other, whether it's, work decisions, I'm thinking of going to do this, what do you think? Or whether it's investment decisions. We talked about this on the last conversation, but in many ways, Sean and I have been benefactors of a large enough age gap that we never had that sibling rivalry piece. Allowed us to kind of be more collaborative. And the fact that we work in different disciplines helps tremendously.
Both of you went on to take different roles at other companies. My question to you is, coming from leading your own organization with the world, especially our world, understanding what you guys built and the transaction that happened, What is it like to work within an organization where you then have a boss? In some cases that you might be more successful than. People tend to look at the hierarchy of these organizations and you think, oh, everybody wants to fight for that top job, when you guys are coming in and you're trying to build these organizations. And then you have to, like you just said, I went to my boss and said X, Y, and Z. But people would be interested to understand what that dynamic is like, having been essentially in that top role and then having someone to answer to in subsequent roles.
From my perspective, I wouldn't take a job that have a boss in sense, right? I've been fortunate enough to use the leverage of the success of the past to go into jobs where I may have a boss who actually has that role and has to hold me accountable. But there's been a lot of collaboration in those relationships where it's more a peer, and there are hierarchy structures that have to be adhered to. There's no doubt, and I respect that. I'm not applying for a job to find a boss. If I end up having a boss, it's because I respect the person that I want to go work with, and they happen to have that role, and they respect me back. The good side of being successful early is that I could always pull a parachute if that wasn't the case. I've had really good luck of being aligned with some really good people, that's boss or subordinate. And I feel like there's just a good respect factor in some of the things that I've been able to take on because I have that sense, which is walk into it as a partnership, no matter what the hierarchy looks like. And typically you'll be successful if you both respect each other. Or
and I assume they're seeking you out. It's not like you're applying to these jobs on monster.com and being like, I really want a burger flip.
I agree. I have a boss and I've had bosses in my subsequent roles. To Sean's point, it's not like the boss employee kind of stereotype where they're just telling you things to do and you go do it kind of thing. I benefited from most of the subsequent roles I've taken where I've had high autonomy because I've established trust and I have a track record. And so I'm able to leverage that into a fair amount of autonomy. As I've explained to my kids a few times, because I'll tell them something like, well, I have to go do something for work. And they're like, but aren't you the boss? And I'm like, whether I'm the boss or not, I'm still accountable to somebody, right? And it might be the person I report to, but I'm always accountable to my own employees too. And so I try to adhere to the same demands that I have of my employees, and I hold myself accountable in the same way. And I just feel like that's a honest way to run an organization. Is I wouldn't ask my team to do anything I'm unwilling to do myself. And I took that with me from some of the early days where we were cabling racks and installing servers and all the things that had to get done. And it broke a lot of the hierarchical kind of archetype that a lot of people have when it comes to their work and the way that they think of organizational structures. Like you said, it's not like I go out seeking a boss per se. I've been the benefactor of having generally had really good bosses when I've taken a role on. And some of those roles, it's been more like Sean said, like you're this trusted advisor, or you've been brought in because of your history and you establish trust, and you're sort of left to kind of go execute and do the things that you need to do with some specific parameters to maybe some guide rails. The dynamic's different than when I was a frontline engineer 25 years ago. I don't feel that same kind of boss employee kind of pressure that I might have felt back in the day. And maybe some of it is from a point of privilege where I could just say, screw it, I'm going home, and just walk away if I feel like it. But I don't think I'd ever do it that way, frankly. I could think about it that way, I can approach the job that way, but I hold myself to a higher standard than just being that guy that just goes home one day because he's not getting something he wants or whatever.
There's this element of freedom and flexibility as well, that you can walk away, like you said. They need you more than you need them, sort of a thing, because you've been there, you've been successful. And it's just mental. The idea that you have to have a job to pay the bills and support the family, where we start this initial conversation at, to, I really don't need to do this. Then you are doing things for the right reason, to be that change agent and take bigger, bolder steps. At least that's the way I look at it. Feel free to correct me.
What I'm hearing through all of these experiences, from the last conversation to this one, is that was never the motivator. Maybe the pressure is there, but ultimately you're doing things that you enjoy doing. And as a consequence of that, it doesn't really feel as though you're taking orders or not taking orders or in a position for any reason other than you kind of just for the love of the game. And when you look at work that way, when you look at whatever you're doing, whatever you put your mind to, if you truly enjoy it, the pressure can come and go, but you're doing it because it's what you're keenly interested in.
You make better decisions that way too, because you're in a position that you're doing it for the right reason versus some career climbing objective or selfish objective or anything like that. At least from my perspective, everything I have done, I've leaned into. We've had success in many of the cases. It's been driven and kind of rooted in like, hey, I like it here. I like what we're doing. There's an opportunity here. We're going to go build something versus, hey, I got a really cool job. I don't know what it's going to lead to, but I'm doing great. How about you guys? There's none of that. And actually, that's a personality type I struggle with candidly. I've seen it from other people, but it's not something I really it's not appealing to me.
I'd say when I let go of like title chase is probably when I started to really enjoy work and stop giving myself pressure about what's my role, what's my title. I focus on the work and I enjoy the work. And it's why I keep coming back to it is I work with really smart people who are doing really interesting things. And sometimes you're building it, you're starting it, you're building it. Sometimes you inherit it and you got to take some ownership over something someone else built. And maybe you wouldn't have built it that way. The task becomes, how do I improve this? How do I make this better? How do I run this more efficiently? And if you have the opportunity to go through like a reinvention or reimagining of the way that you're doing it, cool. Those are the kinds of challenges that hold my attention these days. It comes from 25 years. Early in my career, I did chase things. I did care about the title. I cared about all of those things. And in many ways, I feel like I was probably not as effective because of that, because the decisions I made weren't always based on kind of instinctually what you felt like was the right thing to do. It was based on what's going to progress me, what's going to help me achieve this. Now it's more like I'm more focused on the outcome and the best outcome. I've also pivoted away from myself and more into how can I help the team that works for me in developing them and helping them achieve some of the things that they want to do in their careers.
That is a strange output for me, which if anybody knew me during the Softlayer years, I did not like leading people. Like I enjoyed being the guy that said, can anybody do this? And by the time the question had been asked, I already said, I'll do it. I loved that piece of it back then. The weird pivot for me 20 years later is that I find a lot of satisfaction seeing younger people that I'm leading and giving them the ability to frame into something that they're building themselves up. I would have never thought that would have been where I'm at today in terms of just even that enjoyment factor, but really giving people the opportunity to grow and have their career paths hopefully help by what I'm able to provide them in structure and thought process. It's a weird dynamic to me because I just would have never looked forward and thought, man, I really enjoy leading people and seeing them succeed at this kind of oversight level versus just being the consummate doer.
They do say that the best leaders are typically the reluctant ones, just in general. But if you had to like boil down as you've now managed teams and you have all of these people whose lives you've been able to impact through your advisory and all this work and all these roles you've had, are there a couple of lessons that you've learned over the course of your career that you wish they would know? Like you would tell them, you wait for the opportunity maybe for the right circumstance to come up. But if you just had someone and you wanted to kind of teach them a lesson you wish you had learned in your career, are there a couple that come to mind?
There's a saying that I say, and I truly mean it. And Will talked about me leaving right before the transaction. We talked about the last thing, 9 years, 10 years of a startup is like 50 years of a normal human life. And by the time that I knew the transaction was going to happen, everything was kind of baked. I had the ability to make that decision prior to it happening, knowing that I wasn't leaving with any kind of question mark as it relates to that. It was my time to go. And I tell people this all the time, that if you're in a job where you dislike driving to work, I don't care where you're at from a lifestyle perspective, I just don't think you should drive to work. What I've learned and what I try and instill in my folks is that have some purpose to what you're doing. Make sure you're doing it for something that you're getting out of it and the entity is getting out of it, whatever that entity is. But if you truly harbor this, I just can't stand being here, it's not good for you. It's not good for me as your employer. It's not good for the company. And typically it just leads to like really kind of stale or sour relationships. And as I've grown, life's too short for that. And I know it's easy to say when you got a few bucks and you feel a little more but I'm telling you, like, the harder decision to leave when you just feel like maybe I should stay, but I can't figure out why. I'm sure I have told really good employees out, knowing that they could pull the plug I would probably have a little void if they left. But it's just too short of a lifespan from a professional perspective and from a human personal perspective. If you don't enjoy being somewhere, go somewhere else. Go somewhere where you do enjoy being, because the misery of looking up and 7 years later going, what the hell was I doing here for 7 years? Just making up a number. It's limiting, and you just can't reach potential in that environment. I share that a lot with folks.
The concept of fulfillment as one of the metrics by which you should gauge a career. There are a couple of things, obviously salary and lifestyle, but whether you're fulfilled or not is a huge one. What do you think, Will?
I've had conversations with people and I talk about the arc within a company that everybody sort of has. And sometimes your arc is over. You've reached a point where there's just nowhere to go. And you may not be unhappy, or you may be unhappy, but if you ever get the sense that you're stuck or that you're doing something that isn't fulfilling sort of whatever void you have inside of you, whatever you need to feel fulfilled with the work that you do, it's okay to leave. And that's one of the things that I've tried to tell people probably for the last 10 years. There's no like shame in leaving if you're not getting what you need. And sometimes my job as a leader to recognize that and help move along. And that doesn't mean I fire you. It means we talk about what your career goals are and whether you can achieve them here. And if you can't, okay, well, let me help you find something where you can. And that's, again, to where I was 10 or 15 years ago and where I am now. And while I may miss working with that person, or like Sean said, there may be a void in the organization. That's okay. Like, we can fill those voids and we can bring in people who can do the job. My concern has shifted away from solely getting the job done at any cost to, I want to get the job done, but I want people showing up who want to do the work, who love it as much as I do. And we all have bad days, but can you get up in the morning and feel excited about the work that you're about to do? If the answer is no, if it's like, got to get up and go to work, you probably should move along. Sometimes that conversation is an interesting one because you can tell someone that and they're like, but I don't understand. I thought you like working. It has nothing to do with whether I like working with you or not. But I see that you're struggling and I see that you're unhappy and I want you to be happy and I want you to be successful. So let's work together to help make that happen. And if that means sending you on your way, cool. We'll do that and we'll do it in the proper way versus you coming in one day and just rage quitting because you just had enough.
And the upshot is that the value of that relationship going forward is exponentially better than it ever would have otherwise been. I could point to 20, 30, 50 relationships that I have with employees that I helped move to a different place in a different company that has come back to me 10 times over from a value perspective. So even from a selfishness perspective, it's better to value the relationship than it is to value the productivity.
Absolutely. Indeed. It's purpose-driven. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's always a pleasure to reconnect. And this is probably one of the conversations that we got into a little bit more of a psychological and human behavior discussion, which is really good and unique. But really do appreciate you guys sharing your experiences and journey with the folks that our subscribers. Thank you again.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Charnock brothers.
Enjoy it. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Nomad Futurist podcast. Remember, technology, markets, and challenges will continue to evolve, but those who adapt and prepare are the ones who will thrive. Embrace the change, stay curious, and let's build a future worth moving towards. The journey has just begun, and we're glad you're here with us. Visit us anytime at media.nomadfuturist.org. Stay connected and be a part of the movement. Until next time, keep exploring.